The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, along with my co-host who's long been away from here far too long. Tony Palmeri's back, and want to just thank again Miles McGuire for filling in for the, what was it, I think 4 weeks that you were gone. And Miles did a great job, and very happy that he was able to pinch hit, but it's nice to have Tony back. It's also a pleasure to welcome back to the show Larry Didlo. Now, Larry was with us when he ran for the Oshkosh Area School District's Board of Education last year, and he's now seeking the position as a Republican candidate in the 54th Assembly District. That will be a primary face-off between he and Julie Pungleshki. That will be coming up on September 7th, I believe. September 12th is the primary on that date. And then the winner of that race will go on to the November 7th general election, where the winner will be running against Gordon Hentz. So with that very long introduction, Larry, welcome to the show. We appreciate your taking the time out of your schedule to be here. Why don't we start out, as we do with all of our political guests, you telling us and the viewers a little bit about who Larry Didlo is and why you're seeking this position.
Well, just like the school board, I think it's kind of an extension of the classroom. I had a chance to self-publish a few books on self-literacy and kind of autobiographies of our family, photo style, and it's part of the communication process and maybe of sharing of values, at least that I value. And I thought just another way of getting involved in the community. If I could just read just a few sentences, for example, of this e-book that I wrote on the internet. The author's style or philosophy attempts to embrace tomorrow with the simplicity of faith and tradition, following in the footsteps of America's forefathers. Unfortunately, the traditional family is at risk today. Its values must be guarded and nourished within each home. Values at risk. Meaningful church, educational, and democratic involvement will provide a firm foundation for development. And it's just kind of an extension of for example, writing. I think reading and writing, I think speaking go together. I have here reading literacy starts with the parents reading out loud to their child at the preschool ages. It is to the advantage of young families to do this. Also, church membership is a step in the right direction and definitely associated with reading development and literacy. This might be associated with SAGE. This electronic book of 25 pages and so forth. But it's kind of just another step forward.
So are you running, Larry, are you running for the state assembly to promote your ideas?
No, well, yes, on values and kind of an extension of the classroom. I'm interested in educational reform. That's one of my planks, you might say.
Okay, so does that mean if you don't make it through this primary, are you going to run for school board again?
Probably not. I haven't made that decision yet.
Why are you running as a Republican?
Well, frankly, it's kind of like church membership sometimes. It's by association. My dad was a Republican, and I was brought up as kind of a Republican, trying to value such things as thrift and less government.
Mm-hmm. Have the local Republican Party officials been in contact with you? It seems like they've kind of rallied around your opponent.
Well, I noticed the newspaper, they don't like to publish my picture, but I'm going to run an ad in probably the week before the election. I volunteered at the local county shop, you might say, and on 9th Street, and for example, previous elections, but I haven't been too much involved with the party members and so forth.
All right, Cheryl.
Okay. Larry, the League of Women Voters, along with Wisconsin Common Cause and the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, had sent out some questions. There were 6 yes and no questions, and then there was a 100-word essay question, if you will, 100 words or less. And for whatever reason, and I'm not sure, maybe you'd like to explain why, but you nor Julie Pungleschke, your Republican opponent, had responded to that. So, but they're important questions, and we wanted to give you guys a chance to respond. Julie was invited on the show. She didn't want to appear at this time, but she said she will later. So we'll just start with the first one. Do you support and would you vote for bipartisan legislation to strengthen enforcement of Wisconsin's ethic code and campaign finance laws by replacing the current state elections and state elections board with some kind of a nonpartisan and politically independent government accountability board with an enforcement division with the authority and resources to investigate and prosecute violations of state elections, ethics, campaign finance, and lobbying laws and regulations?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I sent that in later. I probably got over more than 24 letters with respect to surveys, and I overlooked that. But when I read it in the paper, then I followed that up, and I answered yes to all of them, as had Gordon Hentz,
okay.
Democratic.
All right.
So one of the questions, the second question, dealt with comprehensive campaign finance reform. What kind of campaign finance reform do you support?
I'm not too familiar with that question.
Well, let me throw out a few options. Some people would like to see complete public financing of campaigns. Would you like to see something like that? Taxpayer-funded campaigns.
Well, probably not. I think it could be independently financed and also support contributions.
Okay.
I don't know. For example, Congressman Petrie, for example, or even our Democratic governor might fall short if they just relied on that strategy.
Well, let's get to question 3.
Sure.
Right. One of the problems with the current systems, and I'm sure you know, is that we have these so-called issue ads in which the voting public never gets to know who's paying the bill.
Oh.
Right? So you see these ads that say, call Greg Underheim and tell him that you're mad. But we don't know who's putting the money in for that issue ad. Do you think the public should know who's paying for these?
I would certainly want to study the issue. I think that's a
well. Why study it? Why is there an argument as to why we shouldn't know that?
Well, it's part of philosophy. I think generally they're on the up and up, and they don't try to incriminate anyone generally and too much, and I think it's just part of the campaign strategy sometimes used, and it motivates, it gets people interested in the campaign.
But if I'm watching a television advertisement, someone's telling me to support an issue, shouldn't I know who's telling me that?
It depends on the issue, and I've seen different ads, and it can go both ways sometimes.
Okay.
And like
I just don't understand, Larry,
embryonic
why,
eggs and so forth. If they want to talk about church issues, or they want to talk about that, it's more of a medical decision. And what is stem cell research? Now the governor's ad I thought was in good taste,
But if you as a citizen wrote out a check for $500 so that someone could put out an ad, would it bother you if the public knew that you wrote out that check? Shouldn't we know that you wrote out that check so that that ad could be put out?
Not necessarily. I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing with a church donation. If you give church supplies to the nursery, you don't necessarily want to be there and present, because it defeats the purpose of giving.
I know, but if someone is trying to influence how I vote, why shouldn't I, as a voter, know who is trying to influence my vote? That's what I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the strategy used, and I think generally it's not misused, the campaign strategies.
Okay.
I think they're generally mostly ethical.
Okay. What about, there's a fairly new website out on the internet where you can find out more about a candidate's finances and in part, you know, who's helping to finance their campaigns.
Right.
It's also, I think, an attempt at some kind of campaign finance reform. But what most people don't know is that if you put in a request for certain information about a candidate or a sitting elected official, that information, as far as, you know, who's making the request, your name and address, they will ask for that, and then that goes on to the person that you're asking about. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that that is an antiquated law that should be repealed, or is that okay too?
Well, that seems more in line to a private letter or something than some response, at least a response. I know, for example, if you write to the president or the Governor Doyle, generally they don't go into detail. They thank you for your interest, and they talk generally about the issues. They don't go in particular.
So would you be in support of repealing that particular law then about that open government related issue?
No.
No, you would not.
No.
So it's okay that
people,
if you're an elected official, if you make it into the state assembly,
right,
and somebody wants to know about your campaign finances, it's okay that before that information is released to a member of the public that you know who they are.
Yeah, I think it works both ways, right?
Okay.
Okay. The fourth question on that survey, Larry, dealt with legislative redistricting. As you know, in Wisconsin, every 10 years, the legislature rewrites the district lines. And because we have the legislature doing it, it's very political, and they guarantee safe Republican seats, safe Democratic seats. Do you think that the next time we redraw the lines, there ought to be some mandate for competitiveness? That when a district is drawn, it ought to be a competitive district, and not a safe district for Republicans or Democrats?
Well,
you said you answered yes to all the questions, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so why did you answer yes?
I guess I just kind of copied my opponent, but as I understood it, that seems okay.
Okay to have competitiveness.
Right, involved.
Okay,
right.
But you don't seem sure though.
Well, I don't know too much of the details of it. It's just like when you buy a new car, they don't talk about gas consumption. Sometimes they talk about
right.
You know, how shiny it is.
I think the fifth question kind of helps with this one. The fifth question says, do you support creating an independent commission to draw the lines? In other words, is it better that the politicians draw the districts?
Oh, independent commission. Yeah.
Right. Because if an independent commission does it, you're going to have competitive districts. Right now, so you're for taking the politicians out of it,
right,
and making it independent. Okay.
All right.
Cheryl?
And then the sixth question on that questionnaire, Larry, was, do you support and would you vote for legislation to tighten our state's revolving door policy by requiring at least a 1-year cooling off period before former legislators or top legislative aides, key executive branch officials can become registered lobbyists, and prohibiting people convicted of a felony or misdemeanor from pursuing something as a registered lobbyist?
Yes.
You do? Okay. All right. And then what are your particular priorities for your term in office, and what are your specific qualifications to effectively address those particular platforms of yours?
Well, as a classroom teacher, I did teach social studies and language arts at the junior high school level, and civics at 10th grade level, world history. And my practice teaching was in civics at Swart Campus School in UWO about 40 years ago. And then I taught a marriage course, marriage problems course at Menasha as practice. I think that's good background for civic involvement, because here you're dealing with young people, and you're kind of a parent, local parentis, a parent substitute, and I think I can probably communicate some issues, like, for example, I think Carol Owens, 53rd District, I think, Assembly, she's for a marriage and family course, and I think our marriages or our families are at risk, and I think that's one way to get at it. It's not necessarily money, it's just curriculum.
But where would we come up with the money for those kinds of things, Larry? I mean, I don't dispute the fact that that may be a good idea. But, you know, we have thousands and thousands of people in this state alone who don't have health insurance, thousands more who are underinsured. We've got a lot of problems with budgets and salaries and benefits being paid to government employees and so forth, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, the money is drying up. Where would we find more money for something like this?
You mean for marriage and family course?
Yes.
Well, actually, just look at the person's credentials, and if he's qualified, for example, psychology courses, sociology courses, ethical courses, well, for example, religious courses and so forth, or his activities in involvement in the community. I think it's not a matter of money, it's just a matter of who's in charge of the curriculum, and just having that person set aside 2 blocks for teaching. So
as a member of the state legislature, Larry, do you want the government to mandate school curriculum?
No, but I think they can be helpful in getting some good ideas started. They don't have to mandate it, but they can suggest.
So the government should suggest.
They could.
Okay, that's what you would do as a legislator. You get on the floor of the assembly and say.
Well, I would vote for maybe Carol Owen's proposal on.
But isn't that what the Republicans used to call big government? I mean, you've got now the government using government time to tell people to teach marriage. Or
well, I think family is a better term to focus on the family. Yes, especially because I think that's one of our greatest problems. For example, there's more divorce now than there was, for example, after World War II and 10 years after that. I think that's one of our biggest problems.
I agree.
Family relationships.
Everyone agrees that it's a problem, but I think the issue is the role of government in that problem. I don't think we want to they shouldn't mandate it necessarily, but they could possibly give financial aid and support to it. Okay, because you have mentioned the word family several times on the show, and as you know, voters are going to have a chance to vote on a referendum this November that would ban even civil unions among gay and lesbian people. The legislature is not going to vote on that, I don't believe, but where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I would say if there's enough interest, I think it involves a very small percentage of people. And it may get involved in terms of business CEOs if they have, for example, 2 males who are married in civil marriage or religious marriage, and they're in charge of a company. You know, that could influence who they hire and quite a few decisions made. You know. So
do you support civil unions? Or
I would say I don't know right now. I would say I support traditional family values, and that the traditional viewpoint would be between a man and a woman marriage.
All right,
but I wouldn't say it's wrong to have these other civil unions necessarily.
Okay. Sure.
So you don't necessarily support the ban, or you do?
Because the amendment would ban everything. It would ban marriage, which I guess already is illegal in Wisconsin law. But this one would extend even into this thing called civil unions. And it affects heterosexual couples as well.
Yeah, you know, I haven't studied it. I'd be speaking irresponsibly. I haven't studied the issues. And I know for WRST, I think I appeared on a panel in the library, and they had the bill, you know, written out. That was the proposals of about 10 different educational bills, and I'd actually have to see the bill written out so I could better understand, like the terminology between man and a woman, or between 2 men being civil marriages.
What I don't understand, Larry, maybe you can explain this to our viewers. I think everybody would agree that if the Catholic Church or the Lutherans or Methodists or the Jewish religion or Islam, if they don't want to recognize a gay marriage, fine. No religion has to recognize anything. But why does government have to? Why are we concerned that government recognize or not recognize? Why is it if 2 gay people want to get married? Why is that government's business?
Well, I have to study it more.
Yeah.
I know this is a controversial issue. I think it's more of a talk issue than it is actually a problem because it doesn't involve that many people.
But don't you agree that, especially, the Democrats do this too, but don't you agree that the Republicans use these kinds of issues as what are called wedge issues to kind of get people to the polls? I'll give you another example. Death penalty. We're gonna vote in November on whether Wisconsin, which has not had the death penalty for 150 years, whether it should come back. How are you going to vote on that?
I don't know. And speaking of,
are you for the death penalty?
I don't know. That's another gray area. I have to study the bill.
You've never formulated a position on the death penalty?
I would say my tendency would be I would not be for a death penalty, but I could change my mind. Just like I think Greg Underheim changed his mind on Tabor.
Okay, Cheryl.
Well, as long as we're there, how do you feel about Tabor? I mean, I realize Tabor, as it was first introduced a few years back, is no longer necessarily part of the equation, nor is it on the table, but there is a type of Tabor type of legislation that is being bandied about and being tweaked, I believe, even as we speak. How do you feel about something like that?
Well, I feel that they talk about state revenue and it being spent at the local level, but actually it becomes, I think, local expenditures when it gets to the local level, especially for school boards. In Colorado, I think the Tabor that they passed, I think in 1993, whatever, had negative effects on K through 12 curriculum.
Oh yeah.
And so it does have some negative effects. I would vote no for Tabor right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was talking about budgets and so forth. I mean, because that's one of the reasons that Tabor is being talked about, is because taxes keep going up. But one of the biggest drains, as we all know, on a state budget or even a municipal budget is salaries and benefits of public sector employees. And I think most of us would agree you've got to get a better handle on these things and get our arms around it. But at the same time, if we go overboard with that, we're at risk of losing state employees to other states. Where do you stand on, or what is your approach toward getting your arms around salaries and benefits for state employees?
Well, as I see it, Tabor affects the local decision making at the grassroots level, and I'd prefer that be in the hands of like the city council and your state representatives and school board and so forth, city council.
Okay, but as far as state employees go, that would be something that you as a legislator would be in charge of overseeing. So how do you propose bringing those salaries and benefits into line and keeping them in line, while at the same time not losing those employees to other states?
Well, through legislation then perhaps.
Such as?
A mandate having, like, not going over 3% salary increase each year or something like that, like Social Security.
Okay.
What do you feel about the shared revenue program, Larry? This is kind of related to the taxpayer Bill of Rights, in the sense that the shared revenue has not increased. Has it been now in 15 years, something like that? And the city of Oshkosh has been suffering tremendously because those shared revenue dollars have remained just static over the years. Do you think it's time to increase those dollars?
I mean, have a closer relationship between what you give and what you bring back, like, for example, highways or something? Or
well, highway money might be one part of it, but currently in Wisconsin, we send our tax dollars to Madison.
Right.
Then it gets distributed back to the communities through some kind of formula that nobody understands. But we do know that we have not been getting an increase in those dollars.
Well, as a matter of fact, they've been cut.
They've been cut. Do you think it's time to start getting that money back? Without that, we get garbage fees, we get other kinds of fees in Oshkosh.
I think, yes, a committee could be working on that from the city council, and I'd be in for that.
But this is why I asked you, Larry, why you're running as a Republican, because the Republican Party, again, the Democrats have been just as bad. I am an activist with the Greens, but The Republicans have not stood for local control that you've said here tonight you support. The Republicans
for one issue.
Right. The Republicans have been slashing the shared revenue program. You don't think it should be slashed. So how can Larry Didlo get his ideas through the Republican caucus?
Well, I'm not necessarily there to influence other Republicans other than maybe through committee, but that's just probably how I'd vote as from this chair right here tonight.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned K through 12 several times, and obviously you care about educational issues. Currently, the state supposedly funds 2/3 of the cost of K through 12, although I don't think they've really funded 2/3 for the last 5 or 6 years. Do you think they should fund 2/3?
I think they should continue as they have done in the past, and especially during this budget crisis. I think education should not be overlooked, and you shouldn't cut in the education.
Well, let me put it this way. Currently, the funding is 2/3 from the state and 1/3 local property taxes.
Yeah.
Do you think property taxes should be a way to fund schools?
Well, yes, partly.
You do? Okay. Because, property taxes are very regressive. Not everyone pays them equally. Mike Ellis, I believe, has a plan that would eliminate the property tax as a way of paying for schools. And he would.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. No, I think property tax should be involved. Yeah,
it should be.
Perhaps lower or higher depending on the budget too. The budget would affect it too.
Right.
But I don't think. I think right now, because the budget is at under pressure, and we have difficulty with finances at the state level, that we shouldn't cut educational benefits, and it should remain at 2/3.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
We had touched a little bit on health insurance a few minutes ago, Larry, but there's approximately 450,000 people in the state of Wisconsin who have absolutely not a drop of health insurance. And, the movement for some kind of national health care seems to be getting louder and louder each passing week. If you're elected to the legislature, what would Larry Didlo do to help ensure that every person in the state of Wisconsin is covered by some type of health insurance plan?
Well, at the committee level, I would try to do my best, but again, that puts an awful strain on the budget too. And I think if you talk about the amount of money involved, if it's going to overtax property holders, I think this might be a problem too.
Do you think, Larry, we should demand that some of our big corporations pay a greater share?
Well, yes, and they should get maybe tax credit, federal.
Well, because for example, as I'm sure you're aware, we found out that the biggest user of Badger Care, which is the state-run program, health program for poor people, Walmart employees are the biggest user. That's wrong, isn't it?
I don't know.
Well, Walmart, my understanding, is the richest corporation on the face of the earth. Should they not be paying the health care costs of their employees?
Well, I'd have to study the matter. I think of Walmart kind of like McDonald's, the dime store.
Well, you said it several times. I understand. I like to study issues myself, but on something like that, what would be the argument for letting Walmart essentially get welfare? Why would Cheryl and I and Larry Didlo be paying a dime in taxes for Walmart employee health care when they are the richest company in the world? Isn't that kind of absurd?
It does. I don't know how rich they are, but
they're pretty rich.
But just like McDonald's hiring policy, they are more open to diversity, and their employees have more of a need too sometimes.
Well, I see what you're saying. It just to me, it seems like a black and white issue that a Fortune 500 company that allows its employees to leech off a health program that's designed for the poorest people in Wisconsin, when they have I think they are the richest corporation in the world. Something just doesn't sit well with me with that.
Well, and I understand, like you said, that to ensure that everybody in the state would be covered, or in the nation for that matter, it would be a drain on a budget. But don't you think it's also a drain on a state or federal budget to not have people insured? I mean, that means that somebody somewhere is picking up the cost for that health care.
Yes, it seems I would study the matter, and Possibly there might be some alternatives to use of Badger Care. Maybe a supplemental care program similar to Badger Care, not quite so expensive, could be offered to Walmart privately or something. I don't know.
Back on K through 12, Larry, as you know, public school teachers have labored under the qualified economic offer for about 10 to 12 years now. It's essentially a way of avoiding, it's basically eliminated arbitration. School districts can invoke QEO and basically mandate a certain settlement. Do you think, and the teachers have hated QEO for years, do you think it's time to repeal the QEO?
Could you explain what QEO is again?
Well, in the old days, you had management, your school district, you had labor, your school union. They got in a room, they battled and fought, and some years the teachers would end up with a 7% increase, some year a 1% increase. All of a sudden in the mid-90s, Governor Thompson said, no, the teachers will not have that kind of negotiating power. There will be no binding arbitration. Instead, we'll invoke this thing called QEO. It essentially invokes a settlement, right? And you can see why,
spending cap.
Right, but you can see why teachers have hated this, right? They are I believe they are the only employees in the state that have this QEO imposed on them.
And I think under QEO, what is the figure? Is it
3%?
Yeah,
something like that. 3 point something percent of salary and benefits.
3.8% or something like that. It has to be
everything.
A combination of salary and benefits, and that is the minimum that it can go up each year for their salary and benefit increase.
But don't you think it's time to look at repealing something like that? The teachers were singled out for something like that. You were a teacher.
Yes, and I was a full-time teacher 4 years, but I was just thinking of like how Milwaukee would come up with that. You mentioned labor unions. I don't look upon like NEA as a labor union as some of the other groups, but I would certainly want to study the matter anyway.
You're going to be doing a lot of studying between now and the election.
Right. I know. Ask my secretary what she thinks.
Do you think that Wisconsin, Larry, has too many tax-funded services? And if so, which ones are they? And what would you, as a state legislator, do about getting them changed or repealed or what have you?
Well, possibly. There probably are a few pork barrel examples in which I know the federal government is filters through the state government that could be changed, but they settle sometimes issues also, like for example gay lesbian issues where there's a hospital, for example in San Diego, I think they're funded by, and they call it a pork barrel fund to the federal government. These help resolve kind of a valve, escape valve. People vent through them, and they something to talk about. And I think maybe some of the conservation programs could be, our environmental programs could be reduced.
You don't support conservation?
Well, yes, I support conservation, but I think the Republicans are a little bit more conservative with respect to the environment and so forth.
But you think we're spending too much money to conserve land in
well,
Wisconsin?
It depends on what proposal it is.
Okay. As you know, Oshkosh is a university town, so if you get elected, you're going to be representing a lot of students. You know, tuition's gone up 50% in the last 4 years.
Right.
Right? You've been on the campus. You know what it's like there. Is it time to have a freeze on tuition?
Well, I know they're experiencing a building program at the university, and partly it's funded through the students. I would just trust our representatives to make the right decision.
Well, you will be one of the representatives. So when you're the representative and they start talking about the budget and they say, all right, you know what, tuition's going to have to go up another 10% in 2008. Are you going to vote for another 10% increase?
I would have to wait until that time. I know it.
So it sounds like you don't support freezing tuition where it is, or lowering tuition.
Well, I know building programs contribute to the university too as well, and.
But wouldn't you agree, Larry? I'm sure you agree with this, that if Wisconsin's going to have a thriving economy in the next 10, 20, rest of this decade.
Yeah, from that viewpoint, yes.
You got to have a thriving university system, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't you agree that the higher the tuition gets, we are literally pricing people out?
Yes.
So how does the state of Wisconsin benefit when people are priced out of the UW?
Yeah, then from that viewpoint, I would vote for a freeze. Then yes.
Okay, Cheryl.
Okay. We're seeing more and more fees for things instead of taxes. I mean, we're seeing it here at the local level. And even at the state level, you know, we've got a governor who is proposing more fees as a way to kind of keep taxes in line. Do you agree with that kind of thing that Governor Doyle is proposing? And if so, what kinds of fees would you agree with, or would you want to implement yourself?
The Republican opponent of Governor Doyle, let's see, Mark, was it Mark Green? Yes,
Green?
I'm wearing green here, green plaid. But I think he suggested a gas tax, and I think that might be one fee that you could support some of these programs, you know, that we need.
Get rid of the gas tax?
No, have more gas.
Oh, increase the gas tax.
Yeah,
We've got some of the highest gas taxes in the nation.
Yeah, I know, but a few cents wouldn't. I don't think it would make that much difference.
Increase the gas tax for what would you use the extra money for with the gas tax?
Depending on the needs, you know.
Okay, that too would put you against the Republicans.
Oh,
right?
I don't know. I thought Mark was for that.
Is he for increasing the gas tax?
I don't know.
I thought I saw that on television.
One other thing on the K through 12 system, or I'm sorry, Larry, the university system. There are a couple of members of the legislature who look at things like this fella Kevin Barrett, who's the 9/11 conspiracy theorist, and Ward Churchill, the radical Native American. They don't like the fact that these guys came to Wisconsin to speak, and they want to use those events to punish the UW. There's at least one representative has said that he's going to try extra hard to cut the university budget because of that, because we have controversial speakers. You wouldn't support something like that, would you?
Probably not, no.
I mean,
I think controversy is good sometimes because sometimes if everyone agrees with your point of view, there's no growth. And I think sometimes you can, especially meeting the needs of diversity, sometimes you can solve other problems by having controversial people.
Well, what about the university budget in general? We talked about tuition, but the UW has taken, Jim Doyle cut the UW budget by $250 million. I'm a UW professor. I don't know if we've ever really come back from that hit. If you get elected to the legislature, would you stand for increasing the funding to the UW system? Trying to get back some of those cuts?
Yes, probably. Yeah.
Okay. Why probably? Why not definitely yes?
Well, I'd have to study the needs of what programs are taking away from, because we're at a budget crisis now.
Okay, I understand. Go ahead.
Larry, I don't want to be rude here, but I don't know how else to ask the question. You're running for a state office, and yet almost every question we're asking, you're going to study the issue. Don't you think that you should know where you stand on some of these issues by this point in time?
Well, I like WRST, this educational group I met at the library, and they had the bill written out. If I see the bill, then I know more about what I'm talking about. You know, like, are we talking about marriage between a male and a female, or is it if I actually see it goes back to the sperm and the egg? I mean, I think biblically it's more of the male and the female conjecture. You know.
Right. Okay. What about taxes in Wisconsin? Just forget about a specific position. Do you think taxes in Wisconsin right now are fair? Are the rich, middle class, and poor all paying their fair share? Do you think the rich should be paying more in taxes? Are the middle class paying too much? Are the poor paying too much?
I think they're doing probably as well as they can from a bipartisan point of view. I think taxation is neither Democratic or Republican. I think.
But do you support the principle of progressive taxation? Means the more money you make, the more you should pay in taxes. Do you support that principle?
Yes.
All right. Because again, I don't think the Republican Party supports that.
Oh.
It just seems to me that in our state, for example, big corporations don't pay a lot in corporate taxes. You think we ought to have more corporate taxes? They say it will.
Well, I think Wisconsin needs more industry, and they need need tax breaks to actually come to Wisconsin, and sometimes you have to compromise.
But if we and we have incentive programs for big business, if it turns out that we gave a business an incentive under the theory that give them the incentive, they will create jobs, then it turns out they didn't create jobs, or they didn't create good paying jobs. Should we then take away the incentive?
Well, it shouldn't probably be every year, maybe just for the first few years.
Yeah, because my view is that the incentive goes in the CEO's pocket. That's where the incentive goes.
Or his
and everyone else gets the minimum wage job.
Well, you have stockholders, you know.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah. Sure.
Still on the issue of taxes, Larry, one of the suggestions to help kind of reduce some taxes here is altering the state sales tax, even possibly increasing it as a means of helping to reduce or maintain our state property taxes. Where does Larry Didlo stand on the state sales tax issue?
Well, just like the gas issue, I think that's certainly an option that we should consider.
To raise it?
Yeah, not a county tax or a city tax, a sales tax, but a state tax, yes.
Possibly to what? I mean, what would you propose?
To use for necessary programs.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I mean, to what percent? We're at 5% right now.
Well, maybe 6%, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Controversial issue over the last probably 10 years has been guns and whether people ought to be able to conceal and carry them. Wisconsin, I believe, is one of only 4 states that does not allow conceal carry. Do you support that? Should people be able to walk around the studio packing a weapon?
I don't think that's in Wisconsin's tradition, no.
Okay. So
I think this should be in the hands of like security or police concern, you know.
Okay. Because that's another issue where
I know,
you'll be at the Republican Party.
I'm an NRA member, but I don't even own a weapon, but I mean a gun, but a rifle. And
why are you an NRA member?
Well, to learn about the issues.
Okay. Cheryl?
There's a lot of social issues facing us here in the state of Wisconsin. What are some of the top social issues that you see, and how would you work toward addressing them?
Well, I don't know if it's more of a church problem or we need a spiritual renewal, or as Billy Graham might say. But I think if we focus on the family and their needs, that we're going in the right direction. And possibly, I don't know if social work is the right answer. I would say more of a preventative approach and have marriage and family courses suggested taught at the high school level.
Okay.
When appropriate.
What about dealing with other social issues that are equally, if not more important, things like poverty, decent housing, no matter what your income level is, you know, serious health problems, abusive behaviors, things like that?
Well, I think like for example, the city of Oshkosh, they have a public housing department, you know, and they do a pretty good job.
Do you think we need more public housing because there's a lot of people who need some kind of low-income housing? There have been changes in the low-income housing regulations in the last year or so. Do you think that we need to do something more in terms of suitable housing for low-income people?
Well, that would probably be an issue, not so much a state issue as a city or county issue, I think.
Okay.
Larry, you're running in the Republican primary against Julie Pung-Leschke. Do you know Julie?
Well, that's a good does a Dalmatian know the fire hydrant? And I'm not equating her with a dog, but I'm acquainted with her. I'm acquainted with her, yes.
Okay.
And I think she's a able representative, and I think it's good that we have like a man and woman, or a male and a female, as give the residents of Oshkosh a choice. You know?
Yes. What are the differences between you and Julie, other than the fact that you're a man and she's a woman?
Well, I think probably on some of the issues tonight we mentioned.
Do you know? But can you name one issue where you think she is clearly a different?
Well, let's see. She mentioned something about Mr. Ellis from Neenah.
Yeah.
And I think I disagreed with her on the program. I forgot what the issue was.
As you know, this seat has been held by Greg Underheim for probably 18 years.
18 or 19 years.
Do you know Greg?
I sent him a letter.
Okay.
And I probably know him through the post deliverer.
Do you think? What is your judgment of his performance over the last 18 years?
It seems you don't hear too much about our assemblyman.
Right.
When I was working, I would say volunteering or at the Helping Hands. There were community days last couple of years, not this year, but the 2 previous years at Aurora Hospital. He did have dinner with us one time, and I just a couple months ago I saw him at a I believe it was Kiwanis meeting. You know, he was at the morning Kiwanis meeting.
So you saw him in a few meetings, but it sounds like you don't think he necessarily was the strongest advocate for Oshkosh and Madison. You'd be a stronger advocate?
Perhaps.
Well, one thing he did not do a lot of was attend Oshkosh Common Council meetings, Winnebago County Board meetings, Oshkosh Area School District meetings. He rarely appeared to give an update on what was going on in Madison and how what they were doing in Madison was affecting us. If Larry Didlo gets elected, would you regularly come to the meetings of the local governmental bodies?
Well, see, I don't know the pressures on the time. Possibly, in order for him to be an effective administrator or representative, he has to stay in Madison perhaps most of the time, or I don't know.
Well, they're in session for half the year,
yeah.
if that. So let's assume that you're not down in Madison.
Yeah.
Let's assume, I mean, I know they get the entire summer off down there. They're not in session. Let's assume you have 5 months out of the year where you don't have to be in Madison. Would you come to the local meetings at that time?
Perhaps. I don't know the restraints on my time. I think to have a person attend, for example, like a community day, Helping Hands at Aurora Hospital and Kiwanis Club meeting, I think that's important.
See, I get confused, Larry, because when Wisconsin went to a full-time legislature was supposed to mean full-time constituent service. All right? It meant that whenever you weren't in Madison, which is a good chunk of the year, you were in your community doing full-time service. It hasn't worked out that way. Now these guys go down to Madison, they get a great per diem while they're down there, and you rarely see them in the local community.
Well, I saw Greg Underham at the college about a year ago in front of the, let's see, I guess, what's the name of the Polk Library, and he had a QW cap on, I think, and I saw him also in front of Pick and Save, just talking to the people. So I think he's been doing an adequate job. Perhaps he could do better, but I think he...
Okay. Do you think... what would you say about the level of civility in Madison? Do you think that there's too much irresponsible squabbling? Is it too negative down there? What's your view of the level of civility?
Well, I'm just kind of, I have to pass on that. I don't know the situation that well. I'm just kind of I've been morally...
What about politics?
I know what goes on in the classroom once in a while, and it's more than what the parents are aware of, I think.
Sure. What about politics in general? Do you think that politics in general in this country is just not positive enough, or we don't get enough done? Too much petty partisan squabbling?
Well, I think a year from now, after the troops, probably majority of troops hopefully come back from overseas, like the National Guard troops, I think things will level off a bit and we can concentrate more on economic issues and jobs.
Okay, sure.
We've got laws here in the state of Wisconsin that speak directly to open meetings, and yet the state legislature, one of the very bodies that makes these laws, holds closed political caucuses, and they're exempt from the law. Do you support legislation that would require the state legislature to be subject to and forced to adhere to those same laws that they're enforcing on other governmental bodies?
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. In other words, let's take the local city council or school board, or the county board for that matter. Under state law, they have to hold their meetings in public unless there's some reason under the law that allows them to go into closed session or executive session. But the state legislature, while they make that very law, they themselves don't have to adhere to it because they are able to and do hold closed political caucuses. If you're elected to the state legislature, would you be in favor of doing away with that and saying everything is going to be open?
Well, I think there are reasons to have closed sessions. For example, at Rivers Project, it seemed they had a closed meeting, and I think you can get down to the nitty-gritty sometimes, and you don't have to be so publicly conscious of your own position as a representative. And I think you can get more toward the nuts and bolts of the issues sometimes.
But if you're not dealing with bargaining type issues, negotiations, things like that, don't you think that the public has a right to know what our government is doing? I mean, it is our government.
Right. A majority of the time, yes, they should be public. Just like
so
the
these
state.
Political caucuses should not be closed then? Or
I think it should be mostly open to the public, the
Okay.
majority of the time, like two-thirds time or something.
all right.
Larry, you know, there's an energy crisis all over the country, including Wisconsin and so on, and the worse that crisis gets, there becomes more of a discussion of things like nuclear power. Do you think Wisconsin should entertain the possibility of building more nuclear power plants at some point?
I think it depends on the needs, and now they supply would be electrical power,
Yeah.
electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It would depend on our needs, and again, I have to, pardon me, Cheryl, but I'd have to study the matter more. From my standpoint of view, I don't see anything wrong with it. But if you have other ways, just like using coal, there are disadvantages of using coal. But if I lived in Pennsylvania and it was half the price of other power, and we contaminated the atmosphere, well, maybe I'd prefer coal, you know.
Okay. What would be your philosophy of governing, Larry? So, suppose, for example, you study an issue and you come to the conclusion that nuclear power is a good thing. We got to have a plant in Oshkosh. And then your constituents say, we don't want it, we don't want a nuclear power plant in Oshkosh. Would it be your philosophy as a representative to listen to the will of the people, or would you do what you vote the way you want to, regardless of what people are telling you? So it becomes clear to you that, say, 75% of the Oshkosh citizens don't want a nuclear power plant, but you think it's a good idea. How do you resolve that?
Well, I think there are other issues than just what I think. It would depend on the needs of go beyond Oshkosh, and I'd have to keep that in mind too. But probably I'd listen to my constituents.
But there would be times when you would vote in opposition to your constituents.
Possibly, yes.
Okay. When it's see, like nuclear power, for me, that's not an issue of conscience. Is that in other words, on an issue like that, why would you not listen to your representatives?
Well, there might be some other factors. There might be some other factors involved.
Okay.
For example, the cost. It might be a lot cheaper, and it might be. For example, you might be able to heat more homes.
Yeah.
And meet the needs of more people compared to those that would not be in favor of it.
But sometimes the people just don't want it. So, you know, for example, a few years ago in Oshkosh, there was talk about possibly soliciting a casino for the 100 block of, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, it never happened. But lots of people are opposed to expanding gambling. Mm-hmm. So if
that's a different issue, yeah.
Yeah, different issue. But on something like that, do you have strong feelings about that, about something like gambling?
I would say I would be listening to mostly nuclear power and casinos. I'd be listening to the public and try to vote according to their needs and wishes.
All right,
All
Cheryl.
right. Larry, at the beginning of the 2003-2005 biennium, the state had a deficit of $3.2 billion, or approximately thereabouts. We've dealt with budgetary shortfalls in a lot of different ways, both locally and at the state level. How would you propose handling the state budget deficit if you're elected to the legislature?
Well, voting according to what I thought the best interests of the Assembly District 54th would want me to vote.
Well, for example, say corrections. Do you think we're spending too much on corrections? Is that why one of the reasons why our budget is so out of whack?
I don't think so. No.
Should we spend more on corrections?
Well, I think we should take more of a preventative approach and spend more on education, like smaller reading classes at the elementary level.
Okay.
Is there some kind of program contained in the budget that maybe Larry thinks we're spending too much money on, and we could curtailed somewhat?
Well, as I mentioned before, possibly maybe some of your environmental programs could be cut back. But again, I don't have
Well,
any
but
details.
besides environmental things, I mean, are there other things that, like for example, we spend about 1/3 more on our roadways, our highways, than other states in the nation. Are we maybe spending too much there?
I don't think so. Not at least not in Oshkosh for all those potholes.
Well, no, that's true. But those are city streets. You know,
okay.
we're talking
You're talking about highways, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think that's important for new industry, and that brings new industry in too.
Well, because the State Department of Transportation, through what I think is sheer corruption, wants to keep building new roads rather than repairing what we have. I mean, would you support some kind of legislation that would say that the transportation budget should go first toward maintaining what we have?
That certainly would be same thing like roofs and schools in Oshkosh. I think that would be, you should plan ahead of time, and certainly that should be part of your projected goals instead of building new highways all the time.
How much money are you going to spend in your campaign?
Probably $1,000.
So you're not filing campaign finance reports?
Yes, yes.
You are filing?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
which
yes.
means that you probably spent over $1,000 then.
Not actually, a little under.
Okay,
yeah.
so I think if you spend under $1,000, you don't have to file reports, right?
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
Cheryl?
Do you think that local governments, and this kind of gets us back to Tabor a little bit, do you think that local governments can do a better job of stretching the money that they are getting through taxes and the little bit of shared revenue coming back to them?
Well, certainly. I think it goes through your representatives. Just like teachers, they know how to stretch the dollar, and you have to elect the appropriate representatives. And I think that might be an advantage in electing someone who's a little bit older, or maybe 20 or 30 years older than your opponents.
Sure.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time, Larry. Why don't you take a look into camera 3 there and take about 45 seconds or so and tell folks why they should vote for you instead of Julie Pungleshki on Tuesday, September 12th.
Well, I've self-published material on reading literacy and also ideas associated with education on the e-net. I'm not here to advertise necessarily the e-books, but I've gone beyond what the normal teacher does, and to actually try to meet the needs of people who are experiencing maybe the advantages of technology. I think one of my major planks or concerns would be education. I'm 65 years old. Perhaps I can better meet the needs of students through voting for the SAGE program and other educational benefits for especially the younger students and those who experience reading difficulty in the classroom.
Okay, very good. And of course, throughout the show, we've been putting up your email address and your phone number. If people have questions or concerns, they can give you a call or send you an email. Thanks very much for being here, and good luck to you in the September 12th primary. We'll see you next time. Thanks to Tony, and as always, thanks to you. And until then, keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.